We are all waiting right now to see if federal prosecutors indict Sean Diddy Combs, the rapper, the producer, the music mogul. This comes after federal authorities, more specifically Homeland Security agents, raided Combs' two properties out in Miami and L.A. This is reportedly pursuant to an ongoing investigation from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Reports indicate that this centers around sex trafficking, which we're going to discuss a little bit more in a minute. But we don't know what federal investigators are actually looking for. We don't know for sure Combs' connection to all this. And of course, Combs has not been arrested or criminally charged at the time of this recording. However, based upon the allegations in the lawsuits that were filed against Combs in the past several months, which may have prompted or fueled this criminal investigation, and based on what sources are saying regarding the raids and what was collected from the homes, this is going to be my best guess so far at what potential charges prosecutors may be considering. And I'm only going to focus on federal charges since it seems the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York is spearheading this case. This is the feds. So first, let's talk about what seems to be very obvious potential charges: sex trafficking. Now, there are a few statutes that could come into play here. We have 18 U.S.C. Section 1591, sex trafficking of children or by force, fraud, or coercion. So this is when someone knowingly, meaning consciously, they understand what they're doing here, when someone knowingly, through interstate or foreign commerce, usually that means crossing state lines, recruits, entices, harbors, transports, provides, obtains, advertises, maintains, patronizes, or solicits by any means a person for the purposes of commercial sex, or if the defendant benefits from this too. And commercial sex act is when you give something of value in exchange for a sex act, usually through force or threats or fraud or coercion. And of course, this statute includes if the person being trafficked is a minor. Now, if the victim was under the age of 14 or a fraud, force, or coercion were used, the penalty is not less than 15 years in prison up to life. If the victim was 14 to 17, the penalty is 10 years to life. And if anybody obstructs or attempts to obstruct the enforcement of this law, they face up to 20 years in prison. And defendants who are convicted under this law, they're required to pay restitution to their victims as well. By the way, Jeffrey Epstein was charged with this crime before he died. Just keep that in mind. Now, if we assume that Cassandra Ventura, who's Combs' ex, she had filed a lawsuit against Combs, settled with him the day after filing it, but she alleged some heinous acts, said that she was a victim of sexual abuse, physical abuse, really nasty things. But it's now being reported by TMZ that she is cooperating with federal authorities, that she has been working with them for several weeks, even before the raids on Combs' properties. So if she is one of the victims or alleged victims in this criminal case, then her allegations could constitute sex trafficking. So we always wondered if she was cooperating, and if she is, that would be a monumental piece of evidence for the prosecution. And by the way, just generally speaking, we were always wondering who might be cooperating with the feds, whether the plaintiffs in the multiple lawsuits that Combs is facing were the witnesses that provided the feds with probable cause to get the search warrants for Diddy's properties. But yes, taking her allegations as true in her original complaint, what she alleges could constitute sex trafficking. In fact, she cites this statute in her lawsuit. The allegation is that Combs forced her to engage in sex acts across multiple jurisdictions while she was an artist signed with Bad Boy Records, that she was held captive to Combs' demands and desires, that she actually wasn't even allowed to leave at one point, and that Combs' companies and affiliated businesses perpetuated this sex trafficking by Combs to keep him happy. And remember the allegations that Combs supplied her with drugs and alcohol, had sex with her, beat her, and more specifically, forced her to engage in freak-offs. That's where she was compelled to perform sex acts with other men, including sex workers, while Combs watched, pleasured himself, even videotaped the encounters, all over a period of time in multiple locations: New York, Miami, Atlanta, Los Angeles. And then Combs would then pay for trips for Ventura, bought her lavish gifts, rented her an apartment. So that's the value component of the sex trafficking. And that is what she was given in exchange. That's what makes these commercial sex acts, that she was under his employ, that she was getting things of value from him. And this statute seems like it would also apply to the allegations made by a Jane Doe in another lawsuit against Diddy, because she claims that when she was 17 years old, she was gang raped and trafficked by Sean Combs, Bad Boy President Harvey Pierre, and a third person. The allegation was that she was flown from Michigan to New York City on Combs's private jet, remember, crossing state lines, sex trafficking, that she was plied with drugs and alcohol, and that she was sexually assaulted by Pierre and gang raped by all three people at Combs's New York recording studio. Then let's say Rodney Jones is also an alleged victim in this criminal case. Remember, he alleges, he's a former producer of Combs, he alleges in his suit that Combs, his son, various associates and businesses forced him into sex trafficking too. Jones alleges that Combs would touch him, grope him, his private areas, that Combs would set up a situation where actor Cuba Gooding Jr. sexually assaulted him on his yacht. But even more specific to sex trafficking, Jones alleges that Combs forced him to solicit and engage in sex with sex workers, even claims that Combs drugged him at one point. And this was all while he was being transported by Combs to New York, Florida, the Virgin Islands. And throughout the complaint, he alleges that Combs threatened him to do these things too. In terms of the commercial aspect, Jones alleges that all the while this was going on, all the while he was being assaulted and trafficked, Combs was promising him things of value, money, Grammy Awards, access to future projects, a multi-million-dollar home, threatening to not pay him. Now, before I go any further, let me just say one little caveat here. These are all allegations in civil lawsuits, okay? The burden of proof is lower in a civil case than in a criminal case, okay? So these are civil allegations. However, you can have events that overlap. You can have events that can subject you to both civil and criminal liability. So what he is alleging here are, in essence, criminal acts. It'll be up to prosecutors to see if the evidence is sufficient to warrant charges. But again, we are surmising what potential charges Diddy could face. Now, let me also say this. I just laid out examples from these lawsuits that could constitute sex trafficking, but we don't know who else prosecutors may be speaking to or who else could be potential victims that experience similar alleged treatment. But we are talking potentially multiple counts of sex trafficking, or maybe even one large count that includes multiple victims. And it is also my understanding that there is no statute of limitations on federal sex trafficking. Now, keeping all this in mind, I want to bring up some other potential criminal statutes as we talk about sex workers specifically. So there is 18 U.S.C. 2421A. Combs could be charged with this if he knowingly transported someone across state lines for the purposes of prostitution or illegal sex acts. My understanding, that carries a punishment of up to 10 years in prison. You couple that with 18 U.S.C. 2422B, if Combs knowingly persuaded, induced, enticed, or coerced someone across state lines for the purposes of prostitution or illegal sex acts, my understanding is that it could be up to 20 years in prison. I say all of this because if it is true that he had prostitutes at these parties and in his orbit, look, I don't know how they got there, where they were transported from, or how, but this is something that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about illegal sex work. But going back for a second, I was talking about sex trafficking of adults for the most part, but also taking the allegations in Jones's suit as true, it is possible Diddy could be brought up on sex trafficking charges with respect to minors as well. Now, I already mentioned 18 U.S.C. 1591, but there's also 18 U.S.C. 2251, sexual exploitation of a child. Combs could be brought up on this charge if he employed, used, persuaded, induced, enticed, or coerced a minor to engage in any sexually explicit conduct that was filmed and broadcast. The reason I bring this up is there are already allegations that Diddy filmed sexual encounters and had cameras in his home that filmed everything that was going on. And Jones alleges that Diddy had parties with sex workers and minors. So now you're talking about potentially 15 to 30 years in prison. That's my understanding of that. There is also 18 U.S.C. Section 2422B, which makes it a crime to induce or attempt to induce a minor to engage in prostitution or illegal sex acts, like having sex with an adult. My understanding, that is up to 10 years in prison. And then you have to bring up another statute. Again, taking these allegations as true that Combs used threats of violence and actual violence to get people to do stuff for him. I mean, Cassandra Ventura says he savagely beat her. Jones says he was threatened both directly and indirectly by Combs. I mean, he says Combs alleged to eat his face and that he would kill his own mother to get what he wanted. So you have to call out 18 U.S.C. 1589. That makes forced labor a crime. Getting someone to work for you through force, threats, physical restraint, that carries, my understanding, up to 20 years in prison. So when we hear about these allegations about the power and influence of Diddy, his wealth, his team, his associates, this untouchable aspect, that is what is key here. Now, let's also talk about racketeering. This is another potential crime that prosecutors may be thinking about. And it was referenced in the Jones suit. I think it could apply if we think the worst. Take these allegations as true. So racketeering, or RICO, it's about organized crime, a criminal enterprise or organization, and it spans several different sections of the federal criminal code. 18 U.S.C. 1961 defines racketeering activity as, quote, any act or threat involving murder, kidnapping, gambling, arson, robbery, bribery, extortion, dealing in obscene matter, or dealing in a controlled substance or listed chemical, which is chargeable under state law, punishable by prison. It's a serious crime. So first, as even emphasized by Rodney Jones in his lawsuit, the obscene matter and controlled substances could be potential flags here or apply to Diddy. The idea of a pattern of illegal sex acts and drug possession and distribution. Jones specifically mentions the acquisition, use, and distribution of ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, marijuana, mushrooms. Also, there was an allegation in the Ventura lawsuit that Combs blew up rapper Kid Cudi's car because he was maybe romantically interested in Ventura. It could be one of those underlying acts. It could also be an overt act as part of a conspiracy. I'm going to explain that in a bit. But racketeering can also be any act which is indictable under any of the following provisions of Title 18 U.S.C. Again, the federal code. Let me list out a few that could potentially be used by prosecutors. Section 933 relating to trafficking in firearms, many allegations of firearms possession and shootings that Combs was involved in these lawsuits. And it was reported that firearms were retrieved from Combs's properties during those raids. Not clear who they were registered to, if at all, and if they belonged to Combs or his security. There's Section 1341 relating to mail fraud, Section 1343 relating to wire fraud. I'm going to highlight these because Jones said Combs and his companies deliberately and fraudulently induced Jones and others like him to work without getting paid for their work. There is also Section 1511 relating to obstruction. That could be related to allegations that Combs covered up his involvement in violent episodes, including shootings at a recording studio in 2022 and the infamous 1999 nightclub shooting involving his ex, J-Lo. Then there's racketeering that could be acts, Section 1581 to 1592. This is about slavery and trafficking in persons. We already discussed that. There's Section 1956 that relates to money laundering. Yes, Jones alleges that Combs and his companies engaged in money laundering. Section 1962 makes it illegal to financially benefit from racketeering activity. So the allegation here would be that Combs and his businesses, they're making music, they're earning money, they're getting rich off of the labor of these musicians and producers like Jones that they exploit. Another section of 1962 makes it illegal for any person to participate in the racketeering activity. So that could be how you get others potentially criminally charged. And that's actually what brings me to how they could charge Combs with RICO. It probably would be prosecuted as conspiracy to violate the RICO statute. Now, conspiracy is an agreement to break the law, and there must be overt acts or steps taken in furtherance of that conspiracy. Overt acts don't have to be crimes per se, nor do they even have to be events that are separately charged as crimes. I mean, look at the Young Thug trial that we're covering on the Law&Crime Network. Massive RICO case. They have listed 191 overt acts that prosecutors are trying to prove. Here, in this case, you could say shootings, brandishing weapons, threats, soliciting sex workers, blowing up Kid Cudi's car, all allegations. But you see what I'm saying. Gives you an example of the criminal enterprise as part of potential RICO charges. In Jones's complaint, it states that the purpose of the Combs enterprise is to use its position, power, and influence to control all of these people, promoting and enhancing the prestige and reputation of all the people involved, preserving, protecting the power, territory, and criminal ventures of the enterprise. And he goes on to say that it keeps victims in fear of the enterprise and its members and associates, which leads me to believe that Combs wouldn't be charged alone. Then again, you could charge him and identify others as unidentified co-conspirators. But generally speaking, when we talk about racketeering crimes, we're looking at potentially 5 to 20 years in prison. Let me end this real quick by talking out about firearms and drug possession charges. So Rodney Jones claims in his lawsuit that members and associates of the Combs RICO enterprise engaged in drug trafficking and firearms trafficking. There are whole sections of the U.S. Code dedicated to this. Now, we don't know what kinds of weapons were recovered from Combs's properties, but if he had firearms with serial numbers scratched off, or machine guns, or in some cases, certain kinds of rifles or silencers, he could be in violation of 18 U.S.C. 922. Then, if it turns out that he possessed firearms and he's an unlawful user or drug addict, he could be in violation of another section of 18 U.S.C. 922. Also, it is illegal under federal law to use a firearm in drug trafficking or violent crimes, which again is what Jones alleges. Again, Jones alleges that Combs and his crew required those around him and those to be employed to transport unregistered firearms and to purchase and distribute narcotics. Speaking of which, Combs could also face federal drug charges. It is illegal to distribute controlled substances. The penalties vary depending on the quantity and type of the narcotics, but 21 U.S.C. 844 makes mere possession of controlled substances a crime as well. And you can argue that if drugs are found in his home, that could be constructive possession. And with respect to Combs or someone else, let me also say 18 U.S.C. 2 makes it a crime to aid, abet, counsel, command, induce, or procure the commission of a crime. So even if he or his associates don't have to personally commit the crime, they can still be charged if they participated in some way. Since the news came out about these raids, there are a lot of videos that are surfacing of the music mogul, some of which we're looking at now in a different context, to say the least. Let me talk about this video. There was video and photos that seem to show where Combs is right now, because Combs appears to still be hanging out in the Miami area. A fitness coach said he was visiting a restaurant on Friday when he happened to see Combs and some of his friends in line.
Down here at Pura Vida by my pad, run into the man right here. What's up? Miami's like that. Yeah. It's a movie.
Combs apparently flashed an L, said, "Love, what's up?" The day before, he was reportedly spotted at a Top Golf in Miami with his teenage daughters. Seems to be pretty relaxed for a guy whose empire could potentially be at stake and he could potentially be facing criminal charges. Cat Williams, the comedian, he spoke with NFL Hall of Famer Shannon Sharpe back in January on Sharpe's podcast Club Shay Shay. So timeline-wise, this is after some of the lawsuits come out, before, obviously, the raids this past week. Let's hear what he had to say.
Now, I've had to turn down $50 million 4 times. 4 times. Just to protect my integrity and that I was telling you about. Right. Because P. Diddy be wanting to party. And you gotta tell him no. You got to tell him no. I did.
You can see from Shannon Sharpe's reaction there that is an explosive thing that Williams just said. And many people have pointed back to this interview saying Williams predicted that 2024 might be Combs's downfall. But others have recently come out to say that Combs's parties were not a place you wanted to be. That includes rapper Uncle Luke, who spoke with the podcast We in Miami just last week.
Did you party with Diddy a lot?
Oh, no, not really. I would go to the party and leave early.
Why wouldn't you stay late?
I go to the party and leave early. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know what goes on after hours, but
He wasn't trying to find out.
I wasn't trying to find out.
One of the videos that has gone especially viral or circulated in the aftermath of the raids was Combs's interaction with a then 15-year-old Justin Bieber back in what I believe is 2009 as he was just rocketing to stardom. It was posted back in the day on Bieber's YouTube channel titled 48 Hours with Diddy.
Justin, you ever seen the movie 48 Hours? Right now, he's having 48 hours with Diddy, him and his boy. They're having the times of their lives, like you know, where we hanging out and what we doing. We can't really disclose, but it's definitely a 15-year-old's dream.
Given what we know about Combs's party lifestyle through these lawsuits and people have spoken out over the years, it is a little concerning that someone so young was hanging out with the rapper. And in fact, in a video posted on Combs's YouTube channel just a year or so later, Bieber looks, what I believe, uncomfortable interacting with the rapper.
What's up, man? You good?
I'm good. How are you?
All right, young brother, everything's good?
Everything's
Selling
great.
out arenas and everything?
Yeah.
Starting to act different, huh?
No,
You ain't been calling me and hanging out the way we used to hang out.
Well, I mean, you haven't. I mean, you try to get in contact with me, you know, through all my, you know, partners and whatnot. But you never really got my number, so.
Right. Okay.
My number?
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you my number.
Yeah.
Justin Bieber's visit with Combs wasn't the first time the music executive had a rising star at his home. R&B icon Usher is the one who actually signed Bieber to the record label, and Combs was the one who produced Usher's first album. So Usher said during an interview with Howard Stern back in 2016 that his year living with Combs as a teenager was intense.
It was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Yeah, but you were 13. What were you seeing?
I went there to see the lifestyle.
Right.
And I saw it. And it was but I don't know if I could indulge and understand what I was even looking at. It was pretty wild.
Usher also told Stern in that interview, when asked if he would allow his kids to do the same, he replied emphatically, "Hell no." Now, in a strange twist, there is another recently resurfaced video where it seems two worlds have collided. You may have seen the recent documentary Quiet on Set, which looked at alleged abuses, labor violations, and overall just weird behavior on the Nickelodeon sets in the 90s and early 2000s. In the documentary, a few of the former cast members of the SNL-style kids show All That talked about being forced to participate in very uncomfortable scenes. Now, Combs made a guest appearance on that show in 2002. This video, in light of these allegations, rumors, speculations, it has also made the rounds.
Hey, Diddy.
What's up?
We can't wake up Shane.
You try symbols?
Yep.
What about sour milk?
Didn't work.
Tell you what. Take this toy helicopter. Put it down his pants.
All right, we'll do.
The video goes on to show them doing just that, and the boy screams in pain when the helicopter is turned on. It's just an odd situation all around. Ashton Kutcher. Yes, the actor who's been friends with Combs for decades. In fact, Sean Evans of the channel First We Feast interviewed Kutcher while they ate spicy wings on Hot Ones some years ago. And he asked Kutcher about how he met Sean Combs and about Combs's infamous parties.
So, can't tell that one either. I mean, like actually cycling through them. Our relationship was really bizarre. We became fast friends, and we used to just hang out, watch football together. And he came over, and I was like, I'm going for a run. He's like, oh, I'll go for a run with you. And so he comes over to go for a run. About halfway through the run, he's like, yo, I'm running out of gas right now. But we had like paparazzi all around us at the time. He's like, you gotta slow down, but make it look like you're not slowing down.
Because he had to
I don't want to look like I'm not gonna be able to finish this thing. And he was losing it. So we finished out the run, and then he was so upset over the fact that he got skunked on this run. That year, he decided to run the New York Marathon. And so he just started immediately training for the New York Marathon.
I like that. Bounce back.
Well, he just can't lose. Even when he's that close to humility, that like it becomes a driver. And so then he went out and ran the New York Marathon.
Now, to be clear, Ashton Kutcher has not spoken out about Diddy since the lawsuits were filed or since the raids happened.
Ashton, in particular, I think will have a muscle memory of what happened when he came out in support of his former castmate on the 70s show, Danny Masterson, who was accused and then was convicted of sexual abuse and is serving up to, I think, 30 years in prison now for that. And during the sentencing phase, Kutcher had written a letter in support, apparently, of his former castmate, and that did not go down well with the public.
Right. So to emphasize that, when we talk about why we haven't heard from Ashton Kutcher, or maybe we won't hear from either him or his wife, Mila Kunis, they were shunned for their support of Danny Masterson. Again, they starred on that 70s show with him. He was convicted last year, raping 2 women, sentenced to 30 years in prison. And these letters of support after his conviction, before he was sentenced, they said that Masterson had always, quote, treated people with decency, equality, generosity. Kutcher talked about him being a role model. Kunis talked about his excellent character. And, that there was serious backlash. The couple released an apology video, and Kutcher and Kunis, they both had to resign from the anti-child sex abuse organization that Ashton Kutcher had co-founded in 2019. He wrote, "I have worked for 15 years to fight for people who are sexually exploited. Victims of sexual abuse have been historically silenced, and the character statement I submitted is yet another painful instance of questioning victims who are brave enough to share their experiences." So you believe that the backlash they received over the Masterson situation is maybe why we're not hearing anything right now about Combs?
Well, I think it would clearly have an effect. I mean, we can't get inside their minds, of course, but the Daily Mail reporting that that Kunis has told Ashton, this is based on one anonymous source apparently, that he is not to speak out, not to get involved, and it certainly wouldn't be any surprise if the experience they had several years ago with the Danny Masterson situation would have an effect on that. It'd be surprising if it didn't, frankly.
Talk to me about what you know of the Kutcher and Combs relationship. So my understanding is I think they met originally when Ashton Kutcher was going to prank Diddy on the show Punk. That didn't happen. Can you walk us through what you know of their dynamic, the relationship over the years?
Well, it's this is really based on reporting. I don't have firsthand knowledge of it, of course, but that it's been a joking and sort of bro-like relationship, I think, is perhaps a way to characterize it. That they are buddies. They've been good friends. They've been back and forth with each other, and it's sort of a typical, almost typical celebrity, young celebrity bro type relationship is the way I'd characterize it. But we're seeing perhaps the limits of that in terms of not hearing anything from Kutcher, at least at this point, and probably not going to in terms of the situation that's evolved here.
Yeah, and so they both worked on MTV together. Combs was on Making the Band. Kutcher was on Punk'd. Kutcher had previously supported Combs at public events like the launch of the Unforgivable fragrance in 2007 in New York. He also attended Combs' infamous White Party back in 2009. He was actually posed with Combs and Demi Moore. And then in 2010, when Time magazine named Ashton Kutcher as one of the 100 most influential people that year, Combs offered the following quote, that Kutcher is a sounding board for me. Like me, he's a mogul, a new media mogul, but we are yin and yang. I am in your face, but he is understated, cool, suave. Do you think, thinking about this, what seems to be a close relationship that I will tell you right now, I didn't even remember they were friends, but now it makes sense. I'm seeing all this. Right. How is it that people can sue the rapper and producer and potentially talk to the government about him? Didn't they sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements? And by the way, if all of these allegations are true, was it because of these NDAs that people didn't come forward sooner? Important questions, and that's what we're going to get into right now, because the Diddy non-disclosure agreements, a lot to talk about. Now, Combs, of course, is the subject of several lawsuits alleging sexual assault, rape, harassment, physical violence, sex trafficking, spiking the drinks of minors and sex workers, the transportation and possession of firearms. We also know that after federal agents from Homeland Security raided two of Combs' properties in L.A. and Miami last week, it was reported that this was all pursuant to an ongoing investigation potentially centered around sex trafficking. Now, Combs, to be very clear, has not been arrested. He has not been criminally charged, although experts and analysts predict it is only a matter of time. But we shall see. However, what keeps coming up is the contracts that Combs and his team allegedly required those in his orbit to sign to seemingly keep quiet about what they saw and heard. And you're seeing more people who've been associated with him that they've hinted at suspicious or illegal activity taking place, especially during his apparently legendary parties. I mean, to give you a sense, Aubrey O'Day from the musical group Danity Kane that Combs helped to form claimed that Combs had asked her to sign an NDA in exchange for the group's publishing rights. Now, as she said on the podcast Only Stands, quote, I have to release him for any claims or wrongdoings or actions prior to the date of the release. I have to sign an NDA that I will never disparage Puff, Bad Boy, Janice Combs, or Justin Combs' music, or EMI, or Sony ever in public. She also said in another interview in 2022 that she was fired from the group by Combs because she wasn't willing to do what was expected of her, not talent-wise, but in other areas. And also, since the raid, she has referred to herself as a victim. Now, when former Combs producer Rodney Jones sued Mr. Combs, alleging that he was threatened, assaulted, and harassed by the rapper and mogul, he brought up a shooting that happened at Chalice Recording Studios that he implied Combs and his son were a part of. The suit says that, quote, upon information and belief, a few days before the September 12th, 2022 shooting inside of Chalice Recording Studio, Mr. Combs required all attendees of the CRS shooting to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Mr. Jones did not sign the agreement. Unfortunately for the attendees of the writers' camp, they are unaware that NDAs are non-binding when it comes to reporting criminal activity such as a shooting, sex trafficking, and the distribution and use of illegal drugs and guns. A copy of the non-disclosure agreement that a witness who is asked to remain anonymous provided this writer is attached. And that is what we are going to do right now. We are going to break this document down. Joining me right now is David Ring. He is a nationally renowned trial attorney who specializes in sexual abuse cases, even represented a survivor in the Harvey Weinstein saga. David, so good to see you. Thanks for coming back here on Sidebar.
Hey, thank you for having me, Jesse.
Now, before we even get into this document, overall, when you're thinking about the Diddy case, let's say you have an ironclad NDA, okay? Talk to me about some ways that they could potentially be invalidated.
Look, NDAs have a valid purpose if used properly. If you're working for somebody and they have a lot of confidential or personal information that they want to keep private, then there's a place for non-disclosure agreements. The problem with NDAs that we've seen over the past few years is they tend to be abused. They tend to be abused by people in positions of power, people like Sean Combs. And so NDAs can cover a lot of things, but NDAs do not cover criminal activity. NDAs do not cover illegal activity. They do not cover things that are already out there in the public domain, information that's already known. So there could be these very broad NDAs that people are forced to sign. That doesn't mean they can't go to the police or the authorities to report crimes, but yet they're duped into believing that. And that's the problem.
And to follow up on that as well, if somebody was under duress to sign an NDA, I imagine that would invalidate it as well.
Absolutely. So if someone is being pressured to sign an NDA and they sign it under duress and they can prove that, the NDA is not enforceable. And that happens all the time as well, because look, people signing NDAs tend to be in positions of weakness. And the person who's forcing them to sign the NDA is in a position of power. And there can be a lot of duress in that situation.
All right. So, David, with that in mind, you ready to break this NDA down? We're going to go portion by portion. We won't go every line, but we're going to go over it. You ready to do it?
Let's break it down.
Okay, so now, by the way, as we break this NDA down, remember, I cannot 100% guarantee the authenticity of this document, but have no reason to believe that it is not true. It was part of this lawsuit. Let's check it out. Okay, so David, the first thing that struck out to me was who is included in this. So this NDA not only covers the person who is signing it, but also shall include you, your estate, each corporation and or business entity in which you have an ownership or beneficial interest, and any and all persons and or entities owned and or controlled by you and or such businesses, affiliates, employees, officers, directors, managers, accountants, and agents, and all of your respective heirs, executors, representatives, administrators, employees, licensees, successors, and assigns. Is that typical?
Is there anyone they left out? I mean, no, that is not typical. That is so absurdly overbroad that it basically encompasses anyone you know for the most part. I mean, to have your heirs to locked in on an NDA that they've never even met the person who's having you sign the NDA. No, that language is absurd.
Okay, so then it goes into how Combs's privacy is very highly valued, that there are efforts to maintain confidentiality. But then it says you have to keep private not just stuff about Combs, but a lot more concerning and or related directly or indirect. Okay, artist and or any person, corporation, and or other entity related to or affiliated and or associated with artists personally and or professionally, including without limitation, family members, relatives, past or present fiancés, husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, friends, and business associates, collectively, artists, parties. So everyone, again, what do you make of that?
Again, I mean, it encompasses anyone and everyone, and that's the problem. It's so vague, it's so overbroad. Anyone signing this, how would they even know who it applies to? It doesn't just apply to Sean Combs; it applies to basically anyone he knows. And so, again, that's a huge problem.
By the way,
how could you enforce that?
I was going to ask you later on, but I might as well ask you now. If you saw if someone gave you this NDA, would you say there's some red flags here? Like, what are you signing into? Who are you about to be in business with, or who are you about to be associated with? Or would this already, the first paragraph or so, give you a red flag?
If someone came to me and showed me this document and said, "Hey, should I sign this?" I would tell them absolutely not. And who is this person having you sign it, and what is it that you're going to be doing for them? It's a massive red flag to see this 3-page document with all of this legalese. It's insanely overbroad. It gives the person who's having the document, the person Sean Combs in this instance, it's giving him absolute power. And so I would question anyone who came to me with this document. I'd question them, say, I highly recommend you do not sign this.
The attorney who filed one of these bombshell lawsuits against Sean Diddy Combs on behalf of his client, a former Diddy producer named Rodney Jones, would likely be filing another suit against Combs' son, Christian, and that has just happened. Yes, in fact, the yacht incident, which we're going to get into, was mentioned in Jones's lawsuit against Diddy, with Jones claiming in the complaint that he had personal knowledge that Christian drugged and sexually assaulted a woman. And a footnote was included that a complaint would be forthcoming. Now, at the time, I was wondering if Jones would be the one suing Christian. After all, he already sued Christian's brother and Diddy's other son, Justin. But I was struggling to figure out what would be his cause of action against Christian. Well, it turns out that Jones is not suing Christian. It is actually the woman who was allegedly assaulted by Christian, and she is being repped by Jones's lawyer. I will explain. So first, this development comes almost 2 weeks after Diddy's homes in Miami and Los Angeles were raided by Homeland Security investigators. It's part of a sweeping sex trafficking investigation by the Southern District of New York, or at least that's what it's being reported. That's what sources from law enforcement are indicating. Now, Diddy's 2 sons, Justin and Christian, they were seen in handcuffs outside of that LA home during the raid. They weren't under arrest. They were merely detained while officers were assessing the situation and going into the home. But Diddy, Justin, and Christian, they have all been named in these very big lawsuits. But remember, that is civil. That is the civil arena. None of them have been arrested or charged with any crime related to this apparent criminal investigation. But our analysts here on Sidebar expect that at least one arrest will be coming soon. But now we fast forward to Thursday, when attorney Tyrone Blackburn, the man already representing Rodney Jones, filed a civil complaint on behalf of his client, Grace O'Markey. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing her last name, but I believe it is O'Markey. Grace O'Markey in Los Angeles Superior Court, accusing 26-year-old Christian Combs of drugging her and sexually assaulting her in December of 2022 when she was working in a charter boat in St. Martin. So according to the lawsuit, O'Markey says that she had been working as a steward, providing food and drinks on that yacht for a 12-hour period. And she was 25 years old at the time. She believed that the trip would be a, quote, wholesome family excursion, but says it, quote, turned into a hedonistic environment, even describing rampant drug use amongst sex workers and celebrities who came on board. She believes that the alcohol on the yacht had been laced with drugs because she says women would have one drink and then almost immediately pass out or start falling over. This is, by the way, something that it was also alleged in Jones's lawsuit, that Combs would spike the drinks of different people. But focusing on Christian Combs, O'Markey says that Christian Combs had been staying at a villa on the shore, but that he would come onto the yacht in the evening to party. And on December 28th, 2022, Christian reportedly arrived very intoxicated and then proceeded to pressure Omarki to take shots of tequila. She did. Christian allegedly tried to get her to drink more in the yacht's makeshift studio. Omarki alleges that Christian kissed her neck, kissed her face, as he groped her legs, breasts, and private areas. Omarki reportedly told Christian, quote, "Excuse me, you don't touch my legs like that. I'll move my legs where I want to. If I want to do this, then I will. You don't touch my legs like that." Omarki then says that she told Christian she couldn't stay with him unless it was approved by a supervisor, all of whom she knew would be asleep at the time. So this was a way for her to get out of the situation. She claims that Christian said, "Who can I talk to? I'm going to say I requested you right now." Omarki then says she responded with, quote, "Well, you can take your hand off my ass for the first thing." Omarki says that she tried to go back to her work, but Christian found her again, wanted her to find him a place to sleep for the night. So she ended up taking him to the cinema room for the yacht, which doubled as a place for people to sleep. And she claims that is when Christian blocked her and groped her, took off his clothes, tried to force her to perform oral sex on him. She says that she was able to fight him off until someone came in. Now, the lawsuit goes on to say that Omarki told the yacht captain what happened the very next day, but he didn't believe her, didn't do any sort of real investigation. She says the captain retaliated against her for months after the alleged assault before ultimately firing her in May of 2023. Now, aside from her account, aside from a potential other witness, right, the person that allegedly walked in on this, what proof is there that this happened? Well, she reportedly has photos of the bruises that she says were caused by this event with Christian Combs. But she also claims that in that studio, during that first interaction at the time, was Rodney Jones, that former Diddy music producer I mentioned, the one who is suing Diddy. He's known as Little Rod Jones. Remember, he had been basically living with Diddy while the two worked on his latest album. As we discussed on previous sidebars, Jones made multiple allegations against Diddy in his own lawsuit, saying that there was rampant drinking, drug use, sexual assault during Diddy's parties. He claims that he was groped by Diddy, that he was the victim of sex trafficking as he was forced to engage in sex acts with sex workers. He even claims that Diddy groomed him for homosexual sex and facilitated for him to be sexually abused by actor Cuba Gooding Jr. He also claims that there are hours of audio and video footage documenting Diddy's alleged crimes and misconduct. And according to Miss Omarki, Jones taped this event with her. Yes, the lawsuit provides transcripts of audio recordings, and these audio recordings purportedly show, or you can hear, kissing sounds, her telling Combs not to touch her, her allegedly asking about whether she was drugged. Now, we haven't heard these tapes here on Law and Crime yet, but if they are what they purport to be, that is a huge piece of evidence. And remember, when we're talking a civil case, when we're talking lawsuits, the burden of proof is much lower than a criminal case. It's just preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not that this happened. So the civil suit accuses Christian of assault, battery, sexual assault, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They're a big part of this lawsuit. She goes into the mental anguish that she has gone through, the emotional harm that she has suffered as a result of that. That's important in order to prove damages. And by the way, she is claiming unspecified damages, so she hasn't put a number amount on it. But Diddy, let's go back to him. He is also named as a defendant. He is accused of aiding and abetting Christian's behavior, as well as having premises liability because he was the leaseholder of the yacht. Now, premises liability means that you have a duty to keep people on your property safe from injuries. We actually saw a lot of that same kind of theory in the Jones lawsuit when he was talking about this shooting that happened at Chalice Studios, and the owners and occupiers of that studio should just be as responsible as the people who allegedly engaged in that shooting that he was present for. Now, by the way, not sure if these new allegations could play a role in a future federal criminal prosecution of Combs. We're talking so much about the investigation into them. It could be that this is just an isolated incident here and could not be part of a sex trafficking charge. Although I do wonder if this Christian Combs incident or alleged incident could be part of a potential RICO or racketeering charge. As I mentioned on a previous sidebar, when I laid out potential charges that Diddy could face, if we are talking about conspiracy to violate the RICO statute, RICO organized crime, that's what I'm talking about here, that there was a criminal enterprise, to prove that, you would need to show that there was an agreement to break the law, there was an agreement to have this criminal enterprise, and that there were steps or overt acts that were taken in furtherance of that criminal enterprise. Overt acts don't even have to be crimes. They could just be events. They could be things that happen. So could this be an example of an overt act? Could this be an overt act to further this enterprise of illegal sex and power? Could be a stretch. Yes, just something that came to my mind. Now, Miss O'Markey, her attorney, Tyrone Blackburn, said after this lawsuit was filed, quote, "Like father, like son, it gives us no joy or pleasure in filing this suit against Christian Combs, who has clearly adopted his father's pattern and practice of depravity." So far, there has been no response from Christian or his attorney at the time of this lawsuit. But a little side note about Tyrone Blackburn, the attorney representing Miss O'Markey and Mr. Jones. United States District Court Judge for the Southern District of New York, Denise Coate, had some very harsh words for Mr. Blackburn and has even submitted a referral to the New York Federal Court Grievance Committee, claiming issues with Blackburn in 5 cases. In her order, she writes, quote, "Significant resources have been spent by judges of the court and defendants named in actions he has filed to address glaring deficiencies in his filings. A referral to this court's grievance committee is warranted." Judge Coate goes on to write, quote, "A reasonable inference from Blackburn's pattern of behavior is that he improperly files cases in federal court to garner media attention, embarrass defendants with salacious allegations, and pressure defendants to settle quickly." She goes on to write, "Indeed, his submissions to this court have been rife with disturbing allegations against the defendants and defense counsel." So the big theme here is that he allegedly files lawsuits in the wrong jurisdictions and courts, and even allegedly called a defense attorney, quote, "a disgusting racist." Now, this is being reported by Billboard, and in fact, Blackburn wrote an email to Billboard responding to Judge Coate's order saying, quote, "Not sure how this is at all relevant to Rodney Jones's case or any other case I have. This will not have any impact on my ability to proceed in Mr. Jones's case. Although Judge Coate's decision was a referral to the SDNY's grievance committee and not a sanction, I plan on appealing the decision." But remember, the Jones lawsuit was filed in the Southern District of New York, a federal court. So it does seem to have some impact, if you ask me. And look, while we don't know the specifics of these allegations, they do come on the heels of other criticism from other lawyers. After Blackburn filed the lawsuit on behalf of Mr. Jones, Combs' attorney, Sean Holley, alleged that Blackburn ignored basically exonerating evidence. The quote was, "Our attempts to share this proof with Mr. Jones' attorney, Tyrone Blackburn, have been ignored, as Mr. Blackburn refuses to return our calls." Holley goes on to say, "We will address these outlandish allegations in court and take all appropriate action against those who make them." Then the attorneys for Universal Music Group, one of the defendants who are also being sued by Rodney Jones for their alleged participation and facilitation of the abuse and trafficking claimed by Jones, they argued that the claims were so, quote, "offensively false" that one of these attorneys, Donald Zakarin, wrote, "A license to practice law is a privilege. Mr. Blackburn, plaintiff's lawyer, has misused that license to self-promote, gratuitously, falsely, and recklessly accusing the UMG defendants of criminal behavior." So a lot of back and forth that we're seeing right here. And again, to be clear, everything that Diddy and his sons are facing are accusations. They haven't even been criminally charged. These are civil lawsuits. There has been no finding by a judge or a jury that they are liable at this point. Having said all of that, this is a very significant development, and we will see where it goes next. We want to do something different. We want to take a look back at some of the influence that Combs has had over the years, because one of the reasons the raids came as such a shock and that they are so big and they're being talked about so much is because think about the influence and impact Combs has had on the entertainment industry for the past, 20, 30 years? As we mentioned, Combs rose to fame in the early 1990s. He founded the record label Bad Boy Records in 1993, which later became Bad Boy Entertainment. He brought on Christopher Wallace, better known as the Notorious B.I.G., with him to his new label. And by the way, at its height, the label was reportedly bringing in $130 million a year. Combs himself recorded his first vocal work as a rapper in 1997 under the name Puff Daddy, called Can't Nobody Hold Me Down. His first album, No Way Out, went on to win the Grammy Award for Best Rap Album. Those early successes helped cement Combs as a star both inside and outside of the music industry. However, since Cassie's lawsuit was filed in November, Combs' radio airplay has dropped significantly. According to Billboard, Combs' big hits, which have been on rotation for years, have been played less and less, down a reported 88%. Now, as part of Bad Boy, Combs helped bring in some of the biggest names you could think of, the biggest artists: French Montana, Mace, Faith Evans, Janelle Monáe, Machine Gun Kelly. In 2005, Combs and the artist Pitbull co-founded Bad Boy Latino with offices in New York and Miami. Combs is also credited on hundreds of songs for artists like Mary J. Blige, Mariah Carey, LL Cool J, Jay-Z, Ice Cube, Britney Spears. But it is not just music. No. Combs has also had clear connections with the fashion industry as well. You might know that in 1998, Combs launched a clothing line called Sean John. California billionaire Ron Burkle invested $100 million into the company. Sean John became a very recognizable brand name, which pushed Combs further afield, designing Sean John-inspired wheels for cars. Combs also launched multiple fragrance lines like Unforgivable and 3 a.m. And talking about his business ventures, in 2015, Combs once again teamed up with Ron Burkle, as well as actor Mark Wahlberg, to buy a majority stake in Aqua Hydrate, a drink geared to athletes. Now, Combs, he was born in Harlem, has always had a strong connection to New York, and he was even given the key to the city in September 2023, right before the bombshell lawsuits. But it is not just New York that he has big connections to. No. He also has big connections out in Hollywood. He himself starred in an adaptation of Raisin in the Sun with John Stamos. He also acted and was featured in films like Get Him to the Greek, Monsters Ball, Draft Day. He was co-executive producer on films that appeared at Sundance. He's also listed as the writer and performer for a number of songs in numerous films and shows, including most recently Fast X, Transformers, and Euphoria. You may recall that he was the judge on Making the Band. This was an ABC and MTV reality show that focused on different musical acts, including the girl group Danity Kane. And talking about that for a second, one of its members, Aubrey O'Day, she has since spoken out about Combs. O'Day was dismissed from the group, with Combs saying that she wasn't the same person he signed, that fame had changed her. But on a podcast in 2022, O'Day revealed that she was fired because she, quote, wasn't willing to do what was expected of her, not talent-wise, but in other areas. She's since come out since the raids, posting on social media, quote, what you sow, you shall reap. I pray this emboldens all of us victims to finally speak on what we have endured. And then, of course, is Combs' love life. Combs has purportedly dated several A-list celebrities, including Jennifer Lopez, Cameron Diaz, and the late Kim Porter, with whom he has shared 3 children. By the way, his connection to Jennifer Lopez has sparked renewed interest, and whether she could be issued a subpoena now. Why do I say that? Because she is mentioned in the Jones lawsuit. Jones claimed in the lawsuit that Combs showed off his guns, that he would brag about shooting people, and that he confessed he was responsible for that infamous 1999 shooting outside of a New York City nightclub. He claims that Combs admitted that Lopez, who Combs was dating at the time, had been the one that carried the gun into the club for Combs, then passed the gun to Combs. And when he got into an altercation with someone, there were shots that were fired. 3 people were injured. Jones claims that Combs forced his then artist Shine to be the fall guy, taking the blame for the shooting of several people that night. He was sentenced for 10 years in prison, by the way. So not clear if she will be subpoenaed with respect to that lawsuit, or could she be subpoenaed with respect to this criminal investigation? I don't know. We'll see. I will tell you, not everything that Combs has touched or that he's been connected to has prospered. He at one point had a restaurant called Justin's, named after one of his sons. There were 2 locations, but both had been shut down. Combs has lent his name and image to marketing campaigns for Ciroc Vodka after he agreed to help develop their brand. He was paid for every case sold, which grew from 75,000 cases to 400,000 cases in just 2 years. But in June of 2023, new owners of Ciroc ended their partnership with Combs after he accused them of racism. Little side note about that. In their legal battle, which is settled, it was revealed that Combs purportedly made nearly $1 billion from his participation in this liquor venture. The entertainment tycoon has also held a major equity stake in Revolt TV, a television network that also has a film branch. It was recently revealed that Combs had agreed to sell his stake in the network and step down as chairman in November. The move reportedly came after the horrifying allegations made against Combs in the lawsuit filed by his ex Cassie. So, of course, multiple successful businesses means lots of money, right? Combs is reportedly worth some $800 million. That's down slightly after the legal action with the new Ciroc owners. Combs was reportedly making $60 million a year just from Ciroc Vodka, which helped propel him to billionaire status in 2022. His Sean John clothing line was worth a reported $450 million when he sold it to Global Brands Group in 2016, and Combs pocketed $70 million of that. In the hip-hop world, only Jay-Z tops him on the list of richest artists. Combs' jet reportedly cost 8 figures. He owns more than $1 million in jewelry and has a collection of art that includes pieces by Andy Warhol and Jean-Michel Basquiat. His home on Star Island in Miami is reportedly worth over $30 million, and his Los Angeles home in the wealthy Holmby Hills area is worth reportedly over $40 million. So with that kind of money and fame, sometimes things can go sideways quickly. And there is something to think about, too, when we talk about his businesses and his affiliated businesses. Because aside from these businesses potentially being issued subpoenas in this criminal investigation, when you look at the lawsuits, look at who else they're aimed at. For example, in the Jones lawsuit, he listed Love Records, Motown Records, Universal Music Group, Combs Global Enterprises, all as defendants. The theory is that they are all part of a criminal racketeering enterprise, a violation of a federal RICO statute. The companies, Jones argues, are liable for the actions of Mr. Combs, his son Justin, another named defendant, and even Combs' chief of staff, Christina Quorum, as they were employees or agents of these entities acting on their behalf, that these entities should have been monitoring or warning or supervising what these people were allegedly doing. The big theme here is that they were part of a criminal enterprise, namely making money by forcing and threatening people like Jones to transport drugs and guns, solicit minors and sex workers, and make music without properly paying them. The common purpose of this enterprise was, quote, to enrich themselves financially and sexually at the expense of producers and musicians like Jones. I say all of this to explain that it's not just Diddy who is in the crosshairs, but his companies, his associates, his affiliated companies. So in a massive lawsuit that could potentially result in damages from a financial perspective, these legal actions could hurt Combs' wallet, his livelihood, and his reputation, to say the least. And also, that amount of fame and wealth and notoriety, that power, that has become a common theme in these lawsuits, that he had the wealth and the power to threaten the plaintiffs, to force them into certain situations, to do certain things. From the Jones lawsuit, Jones claimed that Combs would use his power and influence to threaten and intimidate Jones. Quote, Mr. Combs would often switch up his approach. He would go from promising Mr. Jones the world to threatening Mr. Jones with physical harm. Mr. Combs threatened to eat Mr. Jones's face and inform Mr. Jones that he is willing to kill his mother, Janice Combs, if he must in order to get what he wants so he wouldn't think twice to harm Mr. Jones. In fact, here is a quote from the Cassie Ventura lawsuit. Quote, "There was no one she could tell about what had happened at the hands of this incredibly powerful man. She recognized that she was powerless, and then reporting Mr. Combs to the authorities would not alter Mr. Combs' status or influence, but would merely give Mr. Combs another excuse to hurt her." So there you have it. Little bit of a history lesson, little bit of a recap about the power, the influence, the wealth of Diddy. Kind of puts everything else a little bit into perspective as he is constantly in the news. And we will continue to cover whatever updates happen in this case. We'll bring them to you here on Sidebar. So as we've been covering here on Sidebar, the rapper, producer, entertainment mogul, he has been hit with massive bombshell lawsuits in the past several months, accusing him of sex trafficking, rape, illegal drug and firearms possession, involvement in shootings. And just last week, 2 of his properties in LA and Miami were raided by federal agents, more specifically, Homeland Security. Now, Combs' sons, Justin and Christian, they were placed in handcuffs. They were detained. They weren't arrested during these raids. And by the way, neither Combs nor his sons, they have not been arrested or charged, even though reporting indicates these raids are pursuant to an ongoing investigation, possibly into sex trafficking, purportedly by the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Southern District of New York. These are the feds, and a lot of our analysts have said that charges could be forthcoming. Having said that, Jeffrey Lichtman, the famed defense attorney who represented Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, John Gotti Jr., rappers The Game, Fat Joe, it is being reported that he is now representing Justin Combs. And Justin and Christian, by the way, they were both named in the Rodney Jones lawsuit. This was the lawsuit filed by Diddy's former producer. But I should tell you that in the latest news, Christian Combs has been hit with a lawsuit of his own, that a woman claims that she was drugged and sexually abused by Christian Combs. We have a sidebar coming out about that, too. Justin, though, was sued as a defendant by Jones, claimed that he was involved in sex trafficking, that he was involved in a shooting from 2022. Now, Lichtman has been very critical of these raids, particularly the level of militarized force that was used. You had armed agents, vehicles. It was a scene. So on Lichtman's podcast, Beyond the Legal Limit, he talks about the raid saying, quote, "The government is not always good and not always honest and doesn't always play by the rules. In fact, it oftentimes does not play by the rules." He goes on to say, "What bothers me the most about it is not so much the search, the overboard search that occurred on Puff Daddy's 2 homes, but the fact that the press was certainly told about it either immediately or right before." He goes on to say, quote, "They were all there, ready to record it. They were all there, told about it, and breathlessly reporting what anonymous agents of law enforcement are telling them about what they're looking for, evidence of sex trafficking. That's bad because that's just an evil thing for our government or law enforcement to do." But here is the kicker. Let's listen to what he had to say about a jury.
By using the press to leak what they're looking for, they're just dirtying a potentially future jury pool. I mean, they use the press to smear Puff Daddy, Sean Combs, for one reason, to deny him a fair trial, to turn public opinion against him. That's un-American.
So that seems to me to be an acknowledgement that a jury is a possibility, that potential charges are a possibility. And that got me thinking, what about a jury in a potential prosecution of Diddy? What would that even look like? For that, let me bring on renowned expert, renowned jury consultant, attorney, psychologist, Alan Turkheimer. Alan, so good to see you. I don't remember the last time you were on Sidebar. If this is your premiere episode of Sidebar, I apologize. I don't remember, but it's good to see you.
You know what? I was a while ago, but
you were? It was too long.
Yeah,
it was too long.
Yeah, it's been a long time. It's always too long.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. So first, before we even get into what a potential Diddy jury could look like, okay? Talk to me about what you made of Lichtman's comments.
Well, Lichtman's certainly a brawler. He's a fighter. You look at some of the defendants that he's represented, and he's going to get started. He's not going to waste any time. He's not going to hold back. And he wants to, in my mind, put out this counter narrative and start the process going of, hey, look, this is the government's bad. They overreached. My client is not guilty. And so he's just not wasting any time doing it. And he's looking down the road, way down the road, because it seems like it'll be a long time before a jury would get a case if there's charges and a trial and whatnot. But he's a planner. He's playing the long game. And so I think he just wants to get the position out that, hey, this isn't fair.
Well, is he right that the level of these raids and the media attention on these raids could taint a future jury pool for Combs and his sons if they are ultimately criminally charged?
I don't think that's the case. I think a lot has to happen, and there's a lot of safeguards that are built in place to keep this from happening. Now, if you fast forward and look at the whole process, jurors are going to forget, or potential jurors are going to forget. Now, even if they watch this, but so a lot of the
You think so?
jury
You
pool,
think they'd really forget this? It's in the news constantly. It was a big deal.
by the time a jury selected, whenever that would be, I think maybe they'll have some recollection of it. But my experience is that jurors would say, "Yeah, I kind of remember he was arrested," but I don't think they would remember what it exactly looked like and what went down. And also, I think jurors, and this is a Southern District jury, they'll draw jurors from the New York County, the Bronx, but then also some of the outlying counties, Putnam, Rockland, and Westchester. And a lot of the jurors that come from those counties, they're not paying close attention to it. And even if some jurors from those counties know a little bit about it or read something about it, by the time trial comes around, there's so many hurdles that have to be overcome for a judge to say, okay, you can't be fair and impartial. You can't serve.
By the way, just speculating here, let's say he is arrested and criminally charged within the next 6 months. Okay. When would you see a trial? How long would it be? A federal trial.
So much of that, yeah, it would be another significant period of time after that, months and months, because so much has to take place with the interviews and the questioning and getting everybody ready and lined up. And of course, the defense can make motions, and everything takes time. So it could be another 6 months, could be up to a year. I don't know. I think a lot of it just depends on the judge that would be on the case, and it wouldn't happen quickly. I mean, in the Southern District, some cases get streamlined, but out of fairness of the defense, there's a lot of motions that would take place, and a lot of, I think, time would be spent making sure that they did it right and didn't just run this roughshod through the process.
Let me ask you this, though. The allegation that Lichtman makes that the government was coordinating with the media, even if that is not true, is that an argument that he could make when it comes to jury selection?
You could say to the judge that, look at all this attention, and you have to support it with facts. You can't just say this was on the news a lot. I think that what his team would have to do is they'd have to hire someone to study the venue. And there's people that do this. There's jury consultants do this. They look at a venue, they do surveys, and they reach a swath of the veneer and ask them what they know about the case and whether or not they formed an opinion, and then whether or not they can let go of that opinion and give P. Diddy, Sean Combs, a fair and a partial look at the evidence. And I think there's a good chance that they could do that.
You mentioned this a little bit, but talk to me about what would a federal jury selection process look like? Again, assuming Combs and or his sons are criminally charged, they're hit with federal charges in the Southern District. What would a federal jury selection process look like?
Very different from state court. It's going to be very different from what we're going to see in a couple of weeks with Trump's trial in Manhattan, because unlike in Manhattan in a state case where lawyers get to ask the questions and get to deeply probe the individuals who could potentially serve on a jury, that's usually not the case in a federal trial. Now, the judges have some discretion. In a case like this, I think it's going to be clear that the jurors do have to be asked in depth about what they know about the case and what their attitudes are, whether or not they made up their minds. But it's not going to take as long as a state case would be. So the judge will either be right there involved, or at least somebody in the court, and they'll go through the jurors, and they'll just have to flat out ask them what they know about the case, whether they formed an opinion, and whether or not they can set that aside. So it could be streamlined. It's the Southern District can be unpredictable. You can pick a jury. It can take a week to pick a jury, or a judge can just say, we're picking a jury, we're doing openings tomorrow, and it could be a day. So there's a lot of
You mentioned the different counties. Where would they go to get a jury pool? How would they send out summons? Would they do some sort of questionnaire before they even bring jurors in for voir dire?
I would think so, yes. So they would. Now, this is a lot of the jurors are going to come from New York County and Bronx County, but then some are going to come from some of the outlying counties like Westchester and Rockland and Putnam. But either way, I think the best thing to do would be to send out maybe 500 to maybe even 750 questionnaires so that they get a sense of somebody, the people that have followed it closely, have made up their minds, and either they've embraced Lichtman's perspective and just on their questionnaire they write, this is a witch hunt. I know that's maybe not for this case, but this is the government's overreaching and it's unfair. P. Diddy's being persecuted. Or on the other end, they would say things unflattering about Sean Combs. Those jurors then, if they fill out a questionnaire ahead of time, then most likely would not be invited to the next phase. Whereas if you send out 500 questionnaires, maybe 125 then end up getting called in. They don't know that much about the case. They have made up their mind. And then they start more in-depth questioning in person. And to reach them, I think this was part of your question. It's usually, from my understanding, either voter registration or state ID. Their voter rolls from the DMV. Also, they can get information on who to call in.
So let's say you get jurors brought into court and you have both sides question them during the voir dire process, right? What kind of questions would they be asked by the government? And what kind of questions would they be asked by Combs' defense attorneys?
Sure. So you're going to ask, both sides are going to want some general questions asked of the participants. They want to know who they are, how they think, what kind of juror they're going to be. And they're also going to ask some pretty case-specific questions about this matter. Now, the general ones are just about what do they think about prosecutions in general, about the government. The government has to worry about people who are skeptical of charges, people who are very pro-defendant, maybe just think that the government does tend to overreach in line with what Lichtman was saying. And then the defense is going to worry about people who think that, well, there's smoke, there's fire. Do they think that whenever there's a prosecution of somebody, a crime was probably committed? And then they're going to also get into the case specifics. They're going to ask about some very personal stuff about being a victim of sexual assault, of sex crimes. Does this ever happen to you or someone close to you? And it doesn't necessarily indicate if somebody's going to be good for the prosecution or bad, but it's probably not a good case they should sit on. And you might think that if somebody's a victim of sexual assault, the defense would not want that person there because that matches the allegations. That's probably generally true. Sometimes if you're a victim of something, you see yourself differently as another victim in a circumstance, but that's going to be a large part of the case specific probing that takes place about their experiences and maybe even some attitudes about sexual assault. Do they think it's more prevalent than gets reported? Is it underreported? It'll be very interesting to hear the voir dire in this case.
I agree. And do you think that the backgrounds of the jurors would be important for either the government or Combs in terms of education, in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of profession? You know, who would the government maybe prefer, and who would Combs more prefer?
Yeah, it's good to know and get a good picture of what makes a juror tick, and certainly their backgrounds and their education. It's a pretty educated venue. So a lot of jurors in the Southern District have bachelor's degrees, graduate degrees. And I guess each side has to figure out, all right, how do we win? Is it better for the prosecution to have detail-oriented jurors, or is it better to have big-picture jurors? And then they can say, all right, well, if somebody's an engineer, they're pretty mechanical, and this is how they think about things versus somebody who's maybe a social worker, and this is how the social worker would assess things. So yes, as it gets close, they're going to scrutinize all the jurors. They're going to not only be able to look at the questionnaire responses and ask some questions, but they're going to have teams on both sides that are going to dig into the social media backgrounds to see what they're posting. If they posted on, if not just this, if they posted on anything about sexual assault or the Me Too movement,
or Diddy,
yeah, exactly. Or Diddy, and anything that gets them more information so they can have a better sense of who they want to strike.
And let me be very clear about this. So Combs, neither Combs nor his sons, they have not been criminally charged. We did an episode a previous sidebar about what potential charges could look like. And obviously, there are comparisons based on the allegations, based on what we're hearing from the raids. There are comparisons between what a potential federal prosecution of Diddy would look like compared to R. Kelly. And the reason I say that is because R. Kelly was prosecuted federally in New York. If you can, do you remember what some of the challenges were in the Kelly jury selection process, or how that might be compared to what a Diddy jury selection process would be like?
If I recall correctly, I think they were able to move through it pretty efficiently. I don't remember the major stumbling blocks or hurdles in that case. I'm sure that some of them existed. I'm sure the defense would point that out.
Well, the reason I ask is because you had such a high-profile individual who was accused of heinous crimes, and in the same way where Diddy has been in pop culture, he's been in the music industry for decades. I see these kind of similarities, and I guess the main question I have to ask you, Alan, is: do you think Sean Combs, if he's criminally charged, can get a fair and impartial jury?
The answer to that is yes. I think there's so many factors built into the process that ultimately, when you start with sending out these questionnaires, whether it's 500 or 700 or 800, and you winnow it down, by the time you get to the jurors who come in for questioning, ultimately you're going to see jurors in the box who I think both sides would have to agree, and the judge too can be fair and impartial. So I do think he can get a fair shake. And you're right, the R. Kelly trial, I just think that also both sides have to be aware of, they're going to have to tell the jurors and voir dire, somehow convey to them that you're going to hear some pretty specific allegations. Some are very graphic and hard to understand and grasp just because of the sexual nature. And you might get some jurors that just say, I can't do this. Even if it's not an experience that they personally had, it's just not for everybody.
And how long it could take, right? If you're dealing with a racketeering or sex trafficking case, those can take some time. And can jurors take that time off?
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think both sides probably, but usually there's one of the sides versus the other, maybe more so. But you want people who can pay attention to the evidence, that are going to listen, follow along. You want generally productive members of society. And if you're a productive member of society, it's not the easiest thing to take 6 months off. Each side has to look out for a stealth juror trying to get on the case to influence the jury in a way that they have a predetermined outcome in mind. So that's something they should also watch out for. If somebody thinks, hey, I'm going to be the one that saves Sean Combs, then I want on this jury. Or from the prosecution standpoint, you might have pro-prosecution jurors that say, oh, this is despicable, and I'm going to get on there. I'm going to make sure that he goes to jail.
And that's why you have to really do a very thorough analysis of the questions you ask these jurors, do a background on these jurors to find out who they are. But we're not at that point yet. Again, this is still the investigation. We do not know what role Combs or his sons play in this whatsoever, but we will wait and see. Alan Turkheimer, thank you so much.
Always fun. Thank you, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.